Hey, everybody. All right. Sarah said I can start it off here. So my name is Brandon and I work at Holmes Murphy, and I'm happy that you guys took some time out of your day. I'm a member of a couple nonprofit orgs myself, and they always try to pull off meetings in the evenings. And usually I'm reluctant, but I usually get a lot of good value out of it. So I appreciate you guys swinging by. I'm going to share my screen here. And hopefully everybody can see it. Hopefully my sound is clear. And so like I said, my name is Brandon, and I work at a place called Holmes Murphy. And I'll get into kind of what our roles are at Holmes Murphy and what kind of our value add is. But just so you know, my contact info will be at the end. I'm pretty much the sole account manager for all Delta Sigma Pi insurance policies, programs, educational initiatives, things like that. So if you ever need anything, feel free to reach out. Like I said, my contact will be at the end. But we have a long partnership with Delta Sigma Pi, and try to give back as much as we can. So I'll talk a little bit here. Really what my goals are is we have this PowerPoint called The Art of Risk. And it's really twofold. For one, I just kind of want you to know who Holmes Murphy is, that we're a partner, that somebody who can reach out to, what kind of services and products we provide to you guys. And then also we're going to do a couple situational analyses on how to evaluate risk day to day in the Greek world. And so I will get going. So Holmes Murphy is really, it's a national group, the 9th biggest insurance broker in the country, but our specific division only does Greek organizations. We have about 80% of the Greek organizations in North America, the first broker to do that as well. And these are just kind of some of the numbers. Some of our clients, pretty diverse book, right? Professional org like yourself, your traditional Greek row folks, some alumni chapters across the country, and then some like alumni associations for schools and things like that. We were founded in 1991 by a guy who said that he was an insurance broker himself and decided that the products he was getting were not sufficient for a Greek organization. So he started his own company, and then that's where we've been ever since. You guys don't have physical locations really, but if you did, we do about 2,000 to 3,000 depending on the month, physical buildings. So if you ever need anything from you're a house core guy and you have a property, or if you know somebody, please feel free to reach out. And so, like I said, what we're going to talk about today is risk, and I'll get into that. And really, what I want you to kind of put in your head situationally is this actually is just a PowerPoint background, but I like to integrate it. Let's say this guy here is a guy who's 22. He goes down to the bars, and his car is here. He made the decision to bring his vehicle here today, and he went into the bar and he's had a couple of drinks. And so we're just going to think about that later on in the situation, and how that can maybe apply to our day-to-day Greek orgs. So what I'm going to talk about real quickly is that a lot of the dues paid by the undergrads, the graduates, the alumni, they go to the insurance. The insurance is a giant percentage of the budget for Greek orgs. And why is that even needed, right? When I was an undergrad at multiple fraternities, I was a professional fraternity member myself and a social member. I didn't know what percentage was going to insurance, but it's a big chunk. Why is that even needed, right? And I think this is easy to explain if you're a treasurer, if you're a house core member, just what's the deal, right? So the first one is there used to be, probably up to like 10 years ago, only like 40% of schools required insurance to be admitted in their IFC, to be on campus, to use their facilities. Almost everybody does now. There's not the only one, they're the ones who slip through the cracks. But everybody says, hey, I need $1 million of general liability insurance for you to participate on our campus, right? Well, a State Farm guy down the street could provide that, but it's not going to be sufficient for a Greek org. So this is just something you have to go and find the right insurance companies and the right partners to provide. Secondly, perpetuating the organization. So I kind of like to think of that as almost, a business sometimes has enough resources to go take a risk. We're going to build a new product. We're going to try a new geography because they have enough built up in the back to take that risk. We don't really have that in our organizations. A lot of our groups don't have a ton of money, don't have a ton of cash flows. So any risk we take could hypothetically bankrupt our chapter or our organization. The insurance can help you, right? It'll pay for legal bills. It'll pay for paying out. And so it's a way to at least keep us around and not have us fade away. I've seen groups that in the 90s or 2000s, they have called me back and said, we're going to restart. And I said, what was the deal? And they said, well, we had an insurance claim and we just kind of dissolved. And so that's the last thing we want. Retaining recruitment and of alumni and alumni involvement. A lot of the folks here probably are alumni already, but there's a big percentage of our volunteer work and our resources come from our alumni. And I think sometimes people are concerned about volunteering because they don't know exactly what puts their personal assets at risk. My chapter I was a member of reached out to me and asked me to be on one of their boards. And for one, it's a conflict of interest because I already do their insurance for them. But I know how much insurance they buy. It's not enough, in my opinion. So I decided, hey, I'm not going to continue to volunteer here. Now, that's a traditional social group, right, with a physical building. But I was just saying, I don't think I see too many claims that I don't want to put my $200,000 house at risk, even if it's small. And so that's just something I think people like to know, is that if an alumni reaches out, you say, yeah, we've got insurance and it covers you, and we'd love to have you guys be involved. Later, I'll talk about who has insurance coverage, but everybody on this call who has any involvement in Delta Sigma Pi has insurance coverage. And so that's really, I think, some people have different strategies. They say, well, we should just insure the name of the organization. I think that's kind of crazy. These are volunteer nonprofits that people are putting their time and efforts into. We want to give you guys legal coverage and items like that. And then lastly, it's a responsible thing to be doing. So there's 4 types of policies that I'm going to talk about that apply to the folks here: general liability, directors and officers, member accident, and crime coverage. Now, some of these aren't going to apply to every person because some of your responsibilities don't overlap with where these coverages go. But I think they're good to at least understand that if you're working with Delta Sigma Pi, that at least you know that there's some insurance coverage there for some of your responsibilities. So all those policies that I'll get to individually in a minute, they all have the same who has insurance, okay? And this is really where the bread and butter of why you come to Holmes Murphy is because of this, because there's really no other insurance companies who have the volume to provide these types of coverages to Greek orgs, okay? And so as we're seeing here, anybody that's on staff at National Group, volunteers, anybody that's a volunteer at the chapter level, our members, the chapter as a whole, the entity, our advisors, and then even pledges, right, and actives. These are all folks who have insurance coverage here, and that's a big deal because it's not just the headquarters staff, it's not just certain folks, it's everybody who really has any involvement in our orgs. Who does not have insurance coverage here? These are, I think, kind of important to see. So the first one is something that's outside the scope of a policy, right? Now, so a policy is a legal document. We follow the letter of the way it's written. If it doesn't say that's in there, they have the authority to maybe say this isn't the way this is intended to cover anything. Something I say, I had a guy that called. It was him and his dad. He was an active member at one of the groups I insure, and he was golfing and his ball sliced and hit a car. And they said, well, let's just file a claim with the fraternity because we could have said that we were doing it on behalf of the fraternity. That's outside the scope of this, right? That these are just that was something they just wanted to do. And so that really what this is intended to do is something that is operations of our organizations, right? So that's where it says a loss falling outside the scope of the policy. Something illegal or intentional, right? I'll get later on. I'm going to talk about kind of the specific Greek coverages in the liability policy, but they're not intending to cover somebody who illegally went out and bought alcohol for a minor who gets injured, right? That's an illegal act in every state. So they're not going to cover that. Just like if I go out and intentionally wreck my car for the payout, that's not going to be covered. An individual that doesn't activity excluded, and I'll get to that a little bit later on who doesn't have what's an activity that would not have coverage. Our parents, that one's kind of interesting because if we have like an alumni event where maybe our parents are coming, doing a parents' day, they slipped and fell at our event, yes, they would have insurance coverage, right? Because they're a third party who's got hurt at our event. But just because if they're named, because I'm a member, they say, well, you are the one who hazed somebody. I'm also going to name your parents. They're not members of Delta Sigma Pi. So they don't have their own, it's going to be a different event. And that's the same with some of our guests, right? If they're individually named in a lawsuit, they're going to have their own insurance policy. And then the college and the university. And that one gets kind of interesting because sometimes, I don't know how many of you guys actually deal with the IFCs, but the IFCs on your campuses traditionally are going to say, I want a proof of insurance. And that just shows, right, just kind of like your car insurance in your car. But they also sometimes say, I want to be on your insurance, right? And so you'll see that. That doesn't mean they're in your policy. That means that they just have the ability to use some of your coverages if they're named in something that they didn't have any part of, right? But they're not in our policies. So these green bulletin points here are 95% of the claims that we see, right? So a construction company, a lot of their claims are going to be a guy who injures himself putting something up. A pizza shop might be a guy slipping and falling out front or having somebody get sick. Ours are almost all going to be right here, okay? And so that's going to be a slip and fall at an event. It's going to be hazing, auto accidents, alcohol events, sexual assault, and assault and battery. Coincidentally, the alcohol also contributes to 90% of the claims that we have. So almost everything here kind of, we can say, ropes into an alcohol event. And something I wanted to kind of point out here is when it says auto accidents, right? And so what auto accidents means, it doesn't mean that your car will have coverage if you hit somebody, just the damage. But what we do is that if you are driving on behalf of Delta Sigma Pi, there is a coverage called hired and non-owned auto, and it's a liability coverage. And so what would happen is that your auto would respond, your individual auto would respond. But if the claim got kind of out of hand and used up all of your insurance, then Delta Sigma Pi's policy would hop on. And so we do see that where if somebody is maybe driving to a national convention and they get into an incident, you're technically driving on Delta Sigma Pi's authority, right? And so there's coverage there. So the interesting thing here is, I'll go back here, is that this doesn't mean we're just covering these activities. Like, oh, if you haze, you have insurance, right? What this is saying is that this is intended to cover people who have done the right thing. So an example is, we had one just recently in which somebody said that there was hazing. He was a new pledge. He had not drank in high school. He just went really overboard, and he went to the hospital. His parents asked him what was going on. They hired a prosecutor attorney because they said you were hazed and this is irresponsible. So who they're going to name in a lawsuit like that is going to be from the top down. It's going to be the national organization and its directors. It's going to be your chapter, maybe an alumni association. It's going to name either like a president or maybe even a risk manager, a social chair. All these people are going to be involved in this lawsuit because that's how lawsuits work. They like to name a bunch of different folks. They're also going to name the person who they say was hazing, and maybe even folks who were just at the party. Like Greg was there, Joe was there, right? All these people all of a sudden are roped in this lawsuit. The way this policy is made is that they're going to explore this case, the insurance company is. And what they're going to do is determine if there's some merit to this hazing case. And if there is a likelihood that hazing occurred or sexual assault occurred, or I bought alcohol for a minor or anything else that's not intended to cover, you don't have coverage anymore, right? The bad guy, right? The person who has hypothetically been hazing. But like I said, they don't just automatically do that. There's going to be exploration of this. They're going to provide you coverage temporarily. But then everybody else there has coverage. The National didn't do anything in this particular situation, right? We're going to provide millions of dollars of defense coverage. And if there's a lawsuit that pays out, so that's everybody that's there. And that's a good thing. More likely than not, a chapter president, right, is going to be named. And we want to have people be involved in our groups and not be scared that if I do sign up for this, all of a sudden I'm at risk to be named in something I never did. No, we've got you covered here in these policies. So that's the general liability. I'm sure you guys maybe have questions on that. Like I said, one question I often get is, hey, how do they determine if somebody actually did something? that's just the legal system. It's interesting on if they, when and where they decide when to cut somebody off from having coverage, right? Because what happens then is if you don't have coverage, it goes to either your homeowner's insurance or your parents' homeowner's insurance to start covering you for liability claims. But we just hope us individually are not going to be at that point, right? So directors and officers is another coverage that is primarily going to be for folks who are doing a lot of financial responsibilities, hiring and firing, recruitment, items like that. And so really what I see in directors and officers, what used to be called management liability, what used to be called errors and omissions liability insurance, now it's called directors and officers. Really the main claims that you see here are going to be one, employment practices, which in this case could mean volunteer practices, which could mean hiring and firing. Really what I see a lot here is maybe somebody's a donor and their kid, and they were an alumni and their kid did not get into our fraternity, and they say that's ridiculous. And the reason why you did it because of this, right? They're going to say, I'm going to file a claim against you guys because you either don't like me personally. There's discriminatory practices here by your organization, something like that. This is made for operations. Another one would be we see a lot of claims here when it comes to Title IX, single sex organizations, having certain standards of who can be a member, who cannot. Those become lawsuits and claims. And this is really not a policy that pays money out. What it does is pay for your legal bills. And so that is traditionally made for, usually an undergraduate chapter is not going to have a ton of exposure here, but anybody who's in an alumni base or something like that does. And the way that Delta Sigma Pi purchases their policy is that some guys can just get it for the national org, because that's usually where it flows up, where they have it that applies to all of our entities, sub-entities. That's chapters, that's house corporations, that's alumni groups, items like that. And one other option or claim I'd like to discuss is also called a fiduciary liability. And so fiduciary liability means that if I am in charge of my organization, I have a fiduciary duty to really do what's best for my organization, right? Well, sometimes we see folks that maybe take it a step too far and they've really done a poor job of managing the finances of this organization or a chapter. And then there's a lawsuit provided by the alumni or the undergraduates. A couple examples. One guy during COVID, I don't know what he was doing, but he had a bunch of money in his savings account for his chapter. He called and said, well, we're only getting 1% back in the savings account. I was thinking about putting it into this X stock, right? And I said, well, it's not my response. It's not my duty to tell you to or not to, but hypothetically, if that were to tank and all of a sudden we went from $10,000 in cash flows to $1,000 in cash flows, you fiduciary probably mismanaged this and you have a risk, right? So we're trying to be smart on where this money goes. Another one is an alumni who donated a ton of money to one of my groups, then decided that group's chapter decided they wanted to become a dry location, meaning there's no alcohol on the premises anymore. He disagreed with that. And so he said, I want my money back, right? So now there's a lawsuit going on back and forth. And so the directors and officers provides legal defense to our folks who are managing finances in our orgs. Crime insurance also kind of applies to just folks who are handling money. This is not going to necessarily recoup you for some of your losses. They might, depending on the claim, but it's also going to provide defense coverage. It's going to, provide prosecutorial. If we found the person who it was, we've now filed a claim against this individual to get that money back. And so this is made for also our folks who handle finances in our groups. So member accident is a unique policy. Even if folks who have been in insurance for a long time, this is a really unique program. And so member accident protection plan is for our active members, and Delta Sigma Pi purchases this both for undergraduates and graduate members. And so what this is for is really what I like to call like an excess medical bill policy. And so if somebody, it doesn't even have to be anything to do with the fraternity, as long as you're an active member in good standing, and there's a medical bill due to an accident, you're going to have your health insurance pay for that. And then any additional bill, Delta Sigma Pi will pay this claim. And so this is a very interesting policy. And it's really what we decided a long time ago is this is something we could provide. And then more and more groups started buying it because it's a benefit of membership, right? This is something we want to get to you. And so it's something that Delta Sigma Pi values as well. It's an injury. It's not an illness. It's not I had COVID and I had medical bills to that. It's I injured myself in an intramural act. So I slipped and fell at home. And so these are things in which you would reach out to Holmes Murphy. You'd provide your explanation of benefits and show what the health insurance is paid now, what amount you have. And so that's, full disclosure here. A lot of our undergrads who have parents, we don't want to upset them. And so by helping out here, it actually improves our standing usually with our groups. And so that's something that's provided there as well. It also has a life insurance component. My roommate, when I was an undergrad, passed away, and we had this exact policy. The life insurance paid out. They started a scholarship under his name with that money every single year at my chapter. And so this policy obviously contributes year in, year out to show that the value that we have for our groups. So when we're talking about claims of insurance, like I was talking about earlier, some groups, depending on the size, mostly our traditional groups, 60% of their budget goes to insurance premiums. And it didn't used to be like that. But the way that the legal system has worked now is that our claims, they come more often than they used to. They're more present. They use the internet. They have all these things in which our claims cost a lot more than they did in the past. And what that does then is in turn, every single year, not only those groups have higher costs, but everybody else has higher costs as well. Similar to a certain type of business, maybe it'd be in Nebraska here, we just had, there's some cannabis legal laws that just went by. One cannabis guy might never have any claims, but the other guy has a bunch of theft. He has a bunch of lawsuits because they mishandled. Everybody else's claims are going to start going up because they say you're a similar type of business. That's the same here on the Greek side, right? Where some groups don't have a lot of claims, but they just view everybody as a similar type entity. And even though you don't have claims, you might go up a certain percentage a year. Everybody else that had claims will go up dramatically more. And there's really only one way that we can cut back on costs, and that is across the board. We're going to bring down the amount of claims that we have and the amount of dollars that are paid out. And so it's especially in a Greek environment in which folks, we have new guys every year. It's hard to do that. We don't have same employees for many, many years. It's our people are switching all the time. So what the best way to do that, what we've determined is just behaviors, right? And so what Holmes Murphy has, it's something called understanding art, and it's very simple, and it's just about approaching a risk and how to determine how we can minimize that, not only for the group, but also for ourselves. And so understanding art, there's three things that we try to evaluate when a risk comes by. Avoid risk altogether, reduce the risk, or transfer that risk. And then we simplified, even though those are easy words, prevent the risk altogether, minimize it, or the risk goes elsewhere, right? So for instance, when I was showing that car earlier, I like to almost make it so simple. It's like that. We had the guy that drove to the bar, meet a guy up real quick to watch the Monday night football game that's on here in 40 minutes. And he's having a couple drinks. Well, now his risk that's been brought forth is what? DUI, getting in an accident, revocation of his license, legal suits, or maybe he'll be fine, right? And that's kind of similar to a Greek party or anything else we do when it involves like hazing or anything like that. There's lots of risk. There's also ways to not incur those risks. And so I kind of think of it that way. So for instance, avoiding the risk altogether. This is the most challenging probably of everything to do in a Greek org, because we like to do some of the stuff that we like to have fun. But there are ways to completely avoid certain risks. We can cancel events. I'll have a scenario earlier that we'll talk about what would be something that we just want to get rid of altogether. Educate our folks so that they don't ever attempt certain behaviors. Have trained undergrads, actives, alumni, do scenarios, do education along those lines. And then just be smart on what type of events we're having. So I don't have a ton of dollars that get paid out. We have no idea how many like random claims we get for just having inappropriate themed social media posts or inappropriate parties and things like that. So that's one way to avoid an event, right? Reduce the likelihood of an incident. We can change where it's at. We maybe decided one location, we didn't really know the guys over here. We didn't like where it's at. Let's just change it altogether. We're still going to have it. We're not avoiding or reducing. What's the source of our issues? Is it all of a sudden we have too much alcohol the last few times we've had events? We need to reduce that. We need to reduce the members or the attendees who shouldn't probably be there, the times, how often we're doing them, and then engage folks, right, who might be a little more responsible than we are, that might have a good eye of what's a bad idea, and other ways to reduce that. And then transfer is ultimately where Holmes Murphy comes in to here, right? And so a transfer, I think, is probably the most underutilized of these, in which I try to recommend folks, if you have the cash flow, and if you have an event, to move it to a third-party venue. All of a sudden, they now are the people who are hosting this event. All of a sudden, they're the ones who have an insurance policy that will apply first. All of a sudden, we have used buses to get guys somewhere instead of we're all driving ourselves. All of a sudden, we have contracts that are signed between two different parties, right? So those are things that it take a little bit of work, but that's the easiest way to reduce risks, other than just eliminating or reducing, right? Or to find ways to offload some of these. So there's a couple items here that we kind of give scenarios about that I think are just kind of interesting, because I know that these are some things I had that happened to me, and I think are rather consistent. So this one says, you are approached by a promoter who wants to host an event. They want to use your branding, not your name, for the promotion. In return, you commit to bringing your entire chapter and marketing the event. The promoter agrees to split the proceeds at the door. They expect up to 1,000 people, and the chapter could make a lot of money. What would you do? Do you avoid this? Do you reduce it? Do you transfer it? In what ways could you do any of those things? Because this is something I remember having this event myself, where somebody said, this is the way we get people, is we get the biggest Greek orgs over here. We put their letters on something, and then we get a bunch of folks here. This is a risk that you can avoid, reduce, and transfer. I don't know if anybody wants to message me on here and say, really, what is something we could do to at least minimize our risk? Otherwise, I'll give you, I think, what some of the answers might be. Well, so what I think here is, some groups would say we're going to avoid this altogether. This is not a sanctioned event by either our chapter or our nationals. So we're just going to eliminate this event altogether. Secondly, we could reduce the likelihood of an issue here by actually asking questions of who's going to be there. Are there sober monitors? Are there adults there? Is there a bartender? Do we have, is somebody charging money? Because all of a sudden that becomes a little bit of a riskier event. So Michael said something about minimize by requiring a cash bar, ensuring ID checks, and working to remove the branding component from this event, and ask more about that event. And I think that's perfect on the reduce and transfer, because the cash bar, as long as somebody else is providing our services there, all of a sudden we don't have this legal obligation that we're serving people, and all of a sudden we have this we're serving folks, and we're going to be brought into an alcohol injury. If we have now offloaded that to somebody else, like Michael said, via transfer, that's a good idea. ID checks is good. Guest lists, items like that. And then removing the branding, I think, is a huge deal. I see a ton of that with certain orgs, in which the chapter just thinks that because they are a member, they have the authority to just put their name everywhere. And even though the national said, or the regional or anybody said, that's not our event, right? But since it's on there now, it is your event, right? There's going to be a lawyer that's going to say, what do you mean? You guys had this branded as yours and marketing as yours. So I agree with you there. There's all kinds of stuff. This isn't, an event that you can necessarily have to avoid completely, but there's ways to minimize it. So the terms on this one are a little weird, but the membership intake process has concluded, right? Our pledging stuff. And associate members, actives, have gotten their AM parents, their bigs. As an officer, someone sends you a confidential text letting you know that some of the parents, the bigs, are requiring the AMs, like the littles or the actives or the pledges, to do servitude work, clean apartments, serve as DDs. What do you do in this scenario, right? And this is pretty active, right? I will give most of our Greek orgs a lot of credit, in which we have, I think, eliminated a lot of the commonplace hazing activities that went around, that were going on forever. But all of a sudden, we have kind of smaller ones that people could still deem as hazing. And so, I guess if you were in charge of a group like this, and all of a sudden you hear about some of the actives are making some of the pledges do some stuff like this, what are we doing? Are we trying to avoid this risk? Do we reduce it, or do we transfer that risk? And what I would probably give as a response is yeah. So Michael is right there. And so unfortunately, most states are if there's a claim that arises from this, there's going to be a hazing suit that will present itself. Whether it's good or bad or whatever, the what has been deemed hazing by states is pretty there's a pretty low bar anymore. I had one in which during their pledging week, the members had to wear a pin that was visible on the outside of all of their clothes every single day. Someone said that was hazing, and it was deemed hazing by the lawsuit. So these are things that I think that we all think sometimes as actives say, well, I had to do that, so this is something that now my pledges should have to participate in as well. And so really what I would try to recommend is, on a designated driver, at a minimum, volunteer-based designated drivers, because we don't really want to require folks to do that. And then like we talked about earlier, we could transfer our risk of getting places. Our jobs as undergrads or as pledges is not to drive the older guys around from the bars. That is not why you joined. And it's not also to clean up for them as after the fact. So to me, that's a void altogether, like you guys said. So these next couple slides are mostly just kind of about some of the resources that Holmes Murphy has, and really what we have a full education team. We have staff that put together resources and documents and webinars consistently. And something that they always try to emphasize is that, especially in a nonprofit group, sometimes you feel like you're the only one that's doing anything in your chapter or region or anything like that. But there are tons of people out there who are in the same boat for different orgs or have historically done things. And that if you ever need anybody to reach out to ask questions, not only are folks at Delta Sigma Pi National willing, but we have tons of resources and folks to talk to about finances, mental health, liability, contracts, items like that. And so there's other people out there that are going through the same items, maybe overwhelmed with their responsibilities, and we can help you out. Something else that we try to recommend is knowing your policy. And what this means is your risk management policy, which is created by the national organization and is traditionally posted on a website. And it shouldn't be too long. Holmes Murphy probably helped create this risk management policy for this organization. And what you want to do is just see what are our practices and policies for new members. What is it for alcohol at events? Is it completely outlawed? What is it for who gets in? What criteria can we put for our membership? Is it a 3.0? Is it, all these things? And so just knowing your policy is important, not only just because it just helps you kind of figure out how to organize everything, but secondly, the liability policy I talked about earlier, there's something in there that's a risk management policy exclusion. And that doesn't mean that if you did something that you're brought into a claim, that if you did it not by the risk management policy, you're not going to have coverage. But there is some gray area there in which they said, well, this is actually the way the policy reads. The national said, this is how you're supposed to operate. And you completely did the opposite. So that could be an intentional act due to the risk management policy. So this is something to know and read and understand and reach out and ask questions for folks. I think is really helpful. Something else I talked about earlier on transfer, but that has kind of become more common, especially with schools, is that schools start sending stuff out and guys people just start signing them saying, this is great. This works. I just want to be active. I just don't want to, I want to be a part of the IFC, things like that. They're usually what we call a unilateral contract, meaning that they're very much in favor of the school and they don't help us out as at Delta Sigma Pi. And so what we recommend is read it. Does it look like something you're saying? That seems kind of crazy that all of a sudden they're making us be responsible for any damages, right? We've rented an event space and they're saying any damage, if it's a slip and fall, even though the school left the mop out, that we have to be liable for that. That seems one-sided, right? So let's read those, reach out to us. We have somebody who specifically does that on our team that looks at contracts and says, if this is something that is fair or not fair, if this is something that your insurance can accommodate or not. If you have a contract, do not sign it in the national name because they are not actually approved of this or signed it. Now, if you sign it under your chapter name, that's different, right? Now we still want to follow the bylaws and the policy, but we are going to we sign things under our chapter name when we do this. And then, like I said, you can Google these terms: indemnification, hold harmless. There's some insurance lingo terms, but a lot of times what people do intentionally is I'm going to write a contract that's super one-sided, and I think the other guy's going to sign it. And so that just happens all the time. And there's ways to negotiate that. If somebody wants your business, if somebody wants you to participate, they'll change their contract more times than not. So hold members accountable is something that we see a lot of times on just when claims could have been prevented and or been stopped earlier. One easy one was literally last spring. I had a guy in a house that kicked a soccer ball and hit the ceiling and it knocked the sprinklers off, and the whole place, all the sprinklers started going off. Everybody's stuff got wet and there's a damage claim. Well, I respect the brotherhood of a Greek org as much as the next guy, but nobody would say who it was. And all of a sudden, everybody's getting dinged from the insurance company saying, well, we know it was somebody over there. And they started getting bills. Eventually, somebody came forward. But if earlier on, we just said, hey, you were the one that caused this damage. Let's just take responsibility here. And let's meet here. And that's kind of a minor case in all reality. Really, what we see sometimes is guys or girls who are at an event and are becoming inappropriate, sexual assault cases, hazing, hold folks accountable, right? And so that's really where we try to say to step in. And this is a voluntary group, and it's an honor to be a part of a group. And if you're not going to meet the responsibilities given to you, then we have to hold folks accountable. Not 2-strike, 3-strike type of situation, but let's start calling people out when there's issues. Another thing is just kind of knowing your resources. So like I said, we try to make as many items available to not only Holmes Murphy clients, but these are free to anybody. Some things that I think are interesting. The bottom one here I think is interesting, is what constitutes an event. it kind of has a checklist. Is this an event? Is this not an event? Something I get questions a lot from mostly undergrads is going to be, if this wasn't our event, quote unquote, how could we possibly be brought into something? Well, some states, just because if you have 2 or more members of a particular organization are present, it could be deemed that organization's event, right? And so there's ways to determine really what are we trying to do and not do and keep and risk. And so these are all some things here to look at: contracts, waivers, guest lists. I know some of the folks in my education team are really into that. Designated driver programs, items like that. And then really the main takeaway, I think, lastly, is for anybody, especially some of the younger members, is that I probably get 1 death claim a month. And so that is usually an individual who is underage, who either just had a bad night, or was hazed, or just had something that was that didn't go right. And there's no way to know, but I think probably 80% of these claims could have been prevented from a death if we would have just called somebody even minutes before, right? And we're coming out with a resource, I think, in about 2 weeks, that talks about amnesty laws in particular states. And what that means is that if you call and somebody that has overdosed or has had alcohol poisoning, that you cannot be legally prosecuted for that, right? And it's a little out of my wheelhouse, but it's something to learn about. And because I understand being a certain age and saying I don't want to take responsibility for this issue that's going on. But like I said, I would much rather have had some personal responsibilities or repercussions than if somebody were to die and then all of a sudden we have even worse repercussions going on. So like I said, I mean, I think the majority of our alcohol and drug cases, if somebody just would have intervened a few minutes beforehand and just said, this guy doesn't look right, this person I don't think has ever behaved like this, it is something to keep in touch. So that is our art of risk right there. And like I said, I do all the programs with every chapter in Delta Sigma Pi, and so I kind of know the lay of the land. And if you guys ever have any questions or have a contract or an event or anything like that, please feel free to contact me, and we can help you guys out. And like I said, if you go to Holmes Murphy Fraternal, you can just Google that. Then there's a resource page right there that has pretty much everything you'd want. And I hope that those become utilized by as many people as we can. And there's this presentation, I think, is there as well, if you wanted to expand that. And so this is something you can use. Does anybody have any questions on how the insurance policy would work, or what would be covered, or how claims would be handled, or anything like that? No? Okay. Like I said, I mean, hopefully I take away is that it's not trying to scare anyone, but there's obviously risks inherent with anything. And the amount of claims we see, especially, it kind of puts kind of surprises you by what people will decide to sue over, right? But I also hope there's a good takeaway is that Delta Sigma Pi has decided to use very, very broad, which is a good thing, insurance policies, providing as much coverage to everyone as they possibly can, lots of insurance limits, so that we can behave and expand our groups and have good behaviors and enjoy that. And so I think that's a good thing, in which sometimes I see groups that are trying to kind of bury their head in the sand, and Delta Sigma Pi does a great job of taking that head on. So I don't think I have any more messages here. And we got some time for you guys. If you guys want to, you guys can have some of your night back.